Hey friend, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Demetria, podcast coach and founder of the Soul Podcasting Collective, and I've been helping solopreneurs launch and grow podcasts since 2004. And around here, we focus on building podcasts that are not just strategic, but they're deeply aligned. Podcasts that actually mean something and sustain over the course of time. So before we get into today's episode, I want to just take a moment to highlight someone from our network, which is the Christian Women Podcasters Network. And I like to do this, and I'm going to be doing it more regularly because the women in our community, which I just launched a few weeks ago, they're not just creating content, they're contributing to a larger conversation. And I think that really matters. So I'm going to tell you about the community in just a moment. But first off, just know that these are awesome podcasters. They're inside of our school space, SKOOL. And I brought this over from a previous network space that I was hosting a few years ago, back in around 2023 or so, from my Facebook. And so we've now opened on school and relaunched in that space. And I also have a dedicated domain name for that as well. But these are women who are either inside of our podcasting network as Christian women podcasters, or they're part of our email community. But either way, they're voices that shape what the whole space is about and what it's going to become. So today I want to shout out to one of our members. Her name is Kristen Brock, and her podcast is called Jesus, Justice, and Mercy. So I'm going to tell you just a bit about her show. Her work sits at the intersection of faith, culture, and lived experience. And she doesn't approach those topics superficially. She's engaging questions that a lot of people are quietly carrying. Questions about justice, about the gap between what we've been taught and what we're actually seeing and played out in the world today, and about what it really means as a Christian to follow Jesus with integrity, especially today in this era and in this time. So I think it's thoughtful work. I think it's necessary work, and it requires a level of honesty that not everyone is willing to step into. So I really appreciate what Kristen is doing. And if you're listening, Kristen, I want to acknowledge the depth and intention behind what you're building. And for those of you who are listening and you're thinking, hey, I want to be a part of conversations like that, I want you to know that you are welcome in this space. You can get connected by joining my email list at soulpodcasting.com. Whether or not you ever join the Christian Women Podcasters Network, I still want you to stay updated and connected and be a part of what we're building in some way. So the link to that is in the show notes. Now, I would love for you to go ahead and grab your coffee. You know how we do it here. We grab our tea, our favorite beverage, whatever you choose to drink today, and we're going to settle in and get into our content. Today, I'm walking you through 4 specific steps to help you move forward with your podcast. If you haven't begun already, or if you're stuck somehow in the beginning stages, I want you to know that this is not a vague or inspirational podcast. I want to give you some actual structure, because what I see over and over again is not a lack of passion. It's not even a lack of ideas. It's just a lack of maybe clarity and process. And a lot of solopreneurs are sitting on strong concepts, meaningful stories, and really important perspectives. But without a clear framework, those ideas stay stuck, or they get started and then stall out because there's nothing holding them together. So what I want to do is give you a process that you can actually follow, something that helps you move from thinking about your podcast to actually building something that exists consistently over time. And there's also an accompanying video that goes along with this episode if you prefer the visual. I really took a good bit of time to create that video, and it's step by step. I go into depth to really explain the different steps. So you can find that linked in the show notes. So you can go over and watch that on YouTube also. My very first phase in this 4-step process is clarity, and that's going to be your foundational part, right? This first phase is where most people kind of rush through. They want to get to the fun part, like naming the podcast and creating cover art. And then they just want to start recording episodes. But without clarity, all of those decisions become unstable. Clarity is not just choosing a topic, it's defining your perspective within that topic. Because saying, I have a podcast about faith, or I have a podcast about motherhood, or something like that, doesn't actually guide your content because it's too broad to support your decision making. So what you need instead is clarity that answers a deeper set of questions, like, what do you believe about that topic that you're speaking on? You need to have like a perspective, a viewpoint that really is something that you can hold on to, that's tangible, that you can stand on. What have you personally experienced in your life that shapes how you approach that topic? What patterns have you noticed that other people may not be articulating just yet? Maybe you can be the one that makes that statement in that way. That combined with your experiences, of course, is going to help you create a meaningful stance. And where do you see a gap in the current conversations that are happening and what you could bring to the table? Because again, your podcast is not just about sharing information broadly, right? We have a lot of voices out here now. More and more people are getting on board with podcasting. Everyone's starting a show. So this has to be something more meaningful for you. And remember that this is about contributing to a larger conversation. And if you don't know what your contribution is, you're going to constantly feel like you're circling instead of moving forward. This is also where a lot of overthinking starts to show up, because without clarity, every idea feels like a possibility, but none of them feel like your anchored place where you need to show up. So you kind of end up second guessing everything. You'll record something and then question whether it fits in the scheme of things, or whether it's something you really want to do or talk about. Or you might plan episodes, but then scrap them because they didn't feel cohesive for what you actually want to do long term. And over time, that lack of clarity leads to inconsistency. And it's not because you're not capable. It's not because you can't do this, or because you don't have the passion to do the work, but it's because maybe you don't feel grounded. So the goal in this phase is not to finalize everything perfectly. We don't get it right from day one. It's to get specific, just specific enough that your decisions start to become easier with each time that you show up. And that starts with clarity. That starts at the very beginning of your decision making. Right from the jump, you want to have clarity. You don't have to keep reinventing your podcast every single time you sit down to create an episode. You want to already know what lane you're in before you get started. And that's really important, because then you'll show up with confidence. And that's what this episode is all about. We want to podcast confidently. And that's why I call it the Launch Confidently Podcasting Checklist. And if you haven't already downloaded that, you can go ahead and get the free workbook. That's available to you. You can even follow along in the workbook as you're listening to this. And you will see kind of the steps, and the actual framework of this is on page 3 of my workbook. So if you just turn to that page, you'll pretty much have the layout of what we're talking about here. And page 4 goes into some of the checklist and questions that we'll be covering. So if you have access to this workbook, it will help you to follow along with the episode today. To get the workbook, click on the link in the show notes, and it's free for you. Let's jump into phase 2, which is the concept, creating structure that actually holds your message. You want to have a concept. So this is where you take your message and you give it structure, because a message without structure tends to just drift. You might have something meaningful to say, but without a clear concept, your podcast won't feel cohesive to the listener. We want to think about their experience, the listener's experience, not just what you want to say, but how will they feel when they're listening to what you're saying. So now the question becomes, how is this podcast experienced? What happens when someone presses play? What kind of episodes are they stepping into? Are you teaching them? Are you having conversations? Maybe a combination of both, like I do on this show. I like to do a little both. Are you walking people through a process step by step? That's kind of what I'm doing on this episode right now. Or are your episodes reflective? Are they exploratory? Or are they more direct and instructional? Is it humorous? Are you entertaining? Like, what is kind of the vibe that you're going for? And just as important, what can your listener expect on a consistent basis? Because strong podcasts don't just deliver good episodes, they deliver a recognizable experience that your listener can come back to week after week and know what somewhat template or cookie cutter episode template from week to week, but For the most part, they know either you're going to have an interview or that you're going to be talking to them about something that will encourage or inspire them or motivate them or teach them something. So they need to be able to recognize that experience that they're probably going to have every week. When someone listens to your podcast, they should begin to understand what they're going to receive from you on a regular basis. And that doesn't mean that every episode is identical, but it does mean there's a level of consistency in how you show up. And it's also where you'll start to define your format, right? This is where, after you've done a little bit of experimenting with the types of formats you want, you can then decide, do I want to focus on solo episodes or interviews, or a mix of both of these? Then you'll think about whether you want your episodes to be shorter, more focused, or do you want them longer and more in-depth? There's no one right answer to this. This is really all about your preference and what you want. The goal is to choose a structure that is sustainable for you and not just something that sounds impressive, because sustainability is what allows your podcast to grow. If you're able to keep going because you like your format, that's going to help you over trying to make a format happen that doesn't feel good, right? It has to feel good to you before it can feel good to your listeners. So you don't want to be doing the most just because you see someone else, another podcast host who's doing it, and it doesn't fit your lifestyle. So remember, you want to create something that you can return to consistently as a confident podcast host. And when your concept is clear, your listener doesn't have to work to understand what your podcast is. They know exactly what they're stepping into. So that's phase 2. Now we're going to hop into phase 3. And that's all about creating your podcast, the execution of your podcast without getting stuck in perfectionism. If you take a look at the workbook, a lot of this is going to fall under the produce part of the workbook. So this would fall under page 13, where we start talking about equipment and like the tactical things that you need to do to produce the show. And this is where you move from thinking and planning and organizing into actually recording and releasing those episodes. And also another spot where a lot of creators get stuck, unfortunately, but because this is where perfectionism starts to interfere with your progress. You start questioning your voice and your delivery, your setup, your technical abilities, your tools, everything, whether or not you're ready. And then you start thinking about whether you need better equipment or more preparation or more time before you actually start. I've seen creators that would stall out after a few episodes because they just kind of begun to second guess themselves. Not necessarily that they didn't have the time or the passion to do it. They just got a little stuck and afraid to move forward because they felt like they needed to go in and redo some of their older episodes because the volumes weren't right and the audio didn't sound right, or just maybe their guest wasn't pleased with what they released. And so they took it down and then they never recorded anymore for 6 months. I've worked with clients who were kind of in a stuck situation with that. And so one of my goals is to help you get unstuck if you're in that situation and you have so much passion and so much to share on your show. You have a lot, you have a voice, and I want to help you release that and to get your message out there. So while some level of preparation is helpful, there's a point where preparation can turn into avoidance, and because you're trying to eliminate uncertainty before you actually take action. But podcasting doesn't work like that. Clarity deepens through the creation process. So once you start creating, you start gaining more and more clarity. You have to put one foot in front of the other before you actually start walking. And so confidence develops through repetition. You start to get confident the more you do something, and skill improves through practice. We all know that the more you work at something, the better you get at it. So it doesn't happen before. It's not the other way around. We have to actually step out in faith and do the work, blunder through it, make all the mistakes, be okay with the mistakes, and just learn through the process. So if you stay in preparation mode for too long, you're going to delay the very process that would help you to grow. And that's why it's important to shift your focus, and instead of asking, is this perfect enough? Is this good enough? I've had podcasters ask me, in the first couple episodes, what do you think? Does it sound okay? Should I go back and tweak anything, change anything? And after listening to their episode, my recommendation for them is just to keep going. Like, you've done the work. Your first episode is fine. Your second episode is fine, and you're going to get better and better. So as long as the audio is agreeable to the ears and your volume levels are good and you're saying everything you want to say and you are delivering the message you want to deliver, I say keep going, and you can only get better with time and with practice. Remember, your listener is not expecting perfection, right? They're looking for something that they can connect to. That's why they subscribe to your show and they follow your podcast, because they want something that feels real, something that meets them where they are. And the more you focus on that, on serving your listener, the easier it becomes to create consistently. You stop trying to get everything just right and you start focusing on delivering something meaningful. And that shift is what allows you to move forward. All right, we're going to hop into phase number 4. And I'm calling this rhythm. And really, in my workbook, my 4 phases are plan, produce, launch, and grow. And I'm going to call this rhythm because this is the growth stage. And this is where we have to just keep going, right? And we get into that rhythm of what works for us, what's sustainable. Because starting a podcast is one thing, right? To start, but continuing it is something else entirely. And what determines whether your podcast continues is not necessarily motivation, but again, it's your rhythm, your structure, your pacing that you can realistically maintain in your lifestyle. Not a pace that looks good on paper, not a pace that someone else is using, but a pace that fits your life, your energy, and the current season that you're in right now. Because if you're a mama with 5 kids under the age of 5, I don't know how you're having time to podcast, but you're probably finding that time during nap times or early in the morning. You're getting up before your babies wake up, or you are finding that time on the weekends, maybe when your partner, your spouse, somebody's taking care of the kids. I don't know what that looks like for you, right? If you're working a 9 to 5, if you're working in the corporate space and you have a full-time career that keeps you so busy and so involved with managing, or you have a high impact role in your business or in your organization that you work for. Maybe you're a key player or strategic team lead or something. You're working all day, right? And you're not just working 9 to 5, but you're also clocking some time into the wee evening hours, and you don't have a lot of free time to work on a podcast, but you really are passionate about doing this work. So how you would find time to create these episodes is going to look very different from someone who has a lot of space in their day, right? So maybe you're doing this on your lunch break, or maybe it's the weekends. Maybe you have one day out of the week where you're doing absolutely nothing, and that's your Saturday. And that's when you show up for your podcast. So you have to find what works for you, and don't worry about what other people are doing, because they might have just a lot more space and time in their lives to do things the way they're doing it. But if your podcast requires more than you can consistently give, it will eventually become overwhelming for you. And when something feels overwhelming, it's just hard to keep doing it. You don't want to return to it. And that's when episodes start getting skipped, and when long gaps happen in your episodes, and it's when people quietly stop podcasting. So instead of building your podcast around these ideal circumstances where you have all the space in your day that you don't in reality actually have, build it around what is actually sustainable for you. And that might mean weekly episodes or bi-weekly, or even some seasonal planning. I do talk about like the planning of your shows and how to go about doing that. I have some previous episodes about that. I'll see if I can find a link to them, and I'll drop those as well in the show notes, because it might be helpful for you in terms of what we're talking about on this episode. But yes, there is flexibility in how you do this work. What matters is that your rhythm is consistent enough to build trust, because trust is built over a period of time. It's built through this repeated being available, this presence that you have, that you keep showing up again and again in a way that your listener can rely on. And it's also built within yourself. You begin to trust your ability to create, to follow through, to develop something over time. And that internal trust is just as important as audience growth, because without it, it's very difficult to sustain anything long term. So, my friends, those are the 4 steps. We have clarity and concept, creation, and rhythm. I've changed the names of those steps in this podcast just to make it a little bit more poetic for you. But if you look at the workbook, those 4 steps are actually very concrete and very to the point, which are plan, produce, launch, and grow. So same idea. If you focus on these 4 areas, you won't just start a podcast. You're going to start building something that can actually continue. And if you're at a point where you're ready for support, I want to invite you into a deeper level of connection. Inside my school community and the Christian Women Podcasters Network, we're having these conversations in real time. I'm there almost every single day, checking in with members of the group, and we have these conversations, and sometimes we have calls, and I'll do some live videos. And this is a place where you're able to ask questions and get feedback and grow alongside other women who are building their podcasts with intention. And if you're looking for more personalized support, I do offer private coaching. I know that the network I've created is not for everybody, but I offer private coaching as well. So you can find all those details for that in the show notes. And also don't forget, again, there's that video for you in this episode if you want to see the process that I just talked about broken down visually. And that link to the video, plus your free copy of the Launch Confidently Podcasting Checklist workbook, is in the show notes as well. So, all right, my friend, thank you for being here today. And I will talk to you in the next episode. Happy podcasting.